Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Versus Stars podcast, third season. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is an amazing episode because Tim Seeley boards the mothership, known as the writer behind the Master of the Universe from Dark Horse Comics. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Seeley. Thanks so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while to talk Master of the Universe, so thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. I always like talking He-Man. That's a thing I do, and I will have a beer while I do it.
Absolutely no worries. So I always had a question of inspiration. So inspire your love of comics and who your earliest influences.
Absolutely, Master Universe has a lot to do with it because when I was a kid, I was 5 years old, and for my birthday, my grandma got me the set that had He-Man and Battle Cat in it, and it had a mini comic in it. And it was actually sort of more of a storybook, honestly, the first ones. But I saw that, and I just became in love with the drawings. And it was Alfredo Calla, and I became totally obsessed with those. And then, I was a big He-Man fan as a kid, and so I kept getting the figures. And the other comics followed after that, including the Master Universe Star comic, the Master Universe DC comic. But that kind of led to Spider-Man and Hulk and those kind of comics when I was really young. It all started with He-Man, which kind of makes sense because that's where I keep coming back to now that I'm older.
So when you're saying you're the Master of the Universe, the He-Man toys, we're talking like the original He-Man, like the Beast Man ones that without the ones with just He-Man without any of the special like battle scars or anything like that. We're talking about the original figure.
Oh yeah, I mean it was like 1982, so I think it was like I was 5 years old. So yeah, it was the original lineup of figures that came out. They had the Mattel kind of, and we interviewed them with the art book. So I know this is the truth is that they were like pitching this to stores, and the stores said, well, what's the backstory? And they said, oh, don't worry, we're having a comic in there, and it's going to be done by DC Comics, and they were just making it up as they went along, and that helped sell the line to the retailers. So it introduced this world. It's funny because it was like probably way more adult sort of oriented when they first came out than it should have worked. But as a kid, I was so enamored with those comics, and I still have all my original.
Oh wow!
From 1982, 1983 Master Universe comics, and they are beat to shit, but they are well loved. So
now, the one thing with the original He-Man comics is that He-Man was the original like continuity issued character where he started off differently in comic books, and then later on they changed the storyline a little bit as the comic books they started evolving. And go, oh, you know what we really want to be is this. So, as a fan, how did you deal with your first continuity errors?
Well, I mean, because the original mini comics in those, and they were written by Don Bluth and drawn by Alfredo Calla, and the story was completely different. But he was a barbarian who had come down from the hills to help these technologically advanced people fight off this demon from another world. And he got his power from like a harness, and Don Bluth would be the first to tell you that the stories are pretty thin, and they were just kind of like, here's another toy, and you can play with this, and but to me that is still the originals. That because it was the first one I saw, that is my favorite version of the He-Man story. I love Adam as basically Captain Marvel or something, which is what they added later, but in the originals, I mean, that to me, the barbarian version is still my favorite. But I mean, as a kid, it's weird. Like that's the kind of thing would never happen now because there's this corporate synergy thing, and they've got to have everything figured out. And the reality with Master Universe is they were just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. They had made these figures, they knew they were cool, and they knew that Star Wars was popular, and that they should get something out to compete with that, and that and so they were just making cool toys. That's all it had to be. And I guess to some degree, I mean, I kind of handled it as like, well, they're cool toys. And to this day, I think I still think of things like, I don't care that much about continuity. I don't care that things tie together. If it's cool, if it's fun, I don't give a shit. And I think I have Master Universe to thank for that. The Star comic wasn't the same thing as the Filmation comic, and the mini comics every time they came out would have a slightly different take on, let's say, Manny Faces or Ram Man or something, but it didn't bother me. It was just like, that's cool. I got another version of this, like it didn't impact anything. And I don't ever remember like talking to my friends and when we were kids playing He-Man, being like, well, I'm going by the sanctioned cartoon version where he's Prince Adam and we just didn't care. Like, I think part of Master Universe appeal was you made your own story anyway. I mean, if you decided, Man at Arms was a bad guy and Faker was the good He-Man, you could do that. I mean, that it didn't matter. You were just a kid playing with a very cool object, and if your favorite toy was Whiplash, then then what Whiplash was the hero of your universe.
So how were you able to incorporate the Shira universe when that got introduced? Was it 85 was Shira or 84?
84, 85, I think, right? Yeah, right. Secret of the Sword comes out around then, so yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, we didn't get girl toys in my house. Like, I had to fight to get Shira. Not particularly because there was any kind of like from my parents there was any weirdness, but there was just like from my friends, that if I brought Tila or Shira over, then that wouldn't be cool. So I got Tila, but I never got Shira and any of that stuff. I think my brother got Bo, and that was like as much. I love the the Secret of the Sword and Christmas special and stuff, but yeah, like our collection of She-Ras was really limited. I think my brother had Cowl too, but it wasn't done at the time. Like there was just these weird social mores about boys playing with girl toys and stuff. So which is really stupid. And to this day now, to make up for it, I buy She-Ras like crazy.
well, what I find is kind of funny is that the Shira line, you have Hordak and Leech, all those characters were made in the He-Man style, but Bo, for some reason, wasn't. So you have this one weird guy that doesn't look like all the other He-Mans, but all the villains were made to look like He-Mans.
Yeah, it was. I remember, and one thing is that, clearly the girls were meant to play with Catra and those villains, Double Trouble, and and if their brothers had Hordak, okay, you can borrow Hordak, and But I think it's sometimes people forget, and I do too, like how sort of 80s wasn't that far from the 50s. Like it was, it's like it wasn't that we weren't that sophisticated or progressive in our lives that we were going to allow girl toys and boy toys to mix. And I think Mattel had learned a lesson from Evil Lynn and Tila because they were shipped peg warmers at the time, which is crazy, but they were a lot less popular than the male figures.
You just made me feel really old because I was just thinking when you said it's not that far from the 50s. Yes, the 1980s was closer to the 1950s than we are to 1980.
Yes. There you go. There you go.
Oh man, that makes me feel old now. So now flashing forward, 2018, I believe you published your first Master of the Universe comic, or it was prior to that year? I think that was Injustice versus Master of the Universe, which was your first.
I worked on the mini comics from Mattel, the 30th anniversary ones, which were 2013 or right? 2013, 2014. So those came out. I did those for Mattel and Dark Horse Comics, and those came out with the 30th anniversary. What we call them, not the Origins figures, but the Classics figures. Those came out with that, and then I worked on the Art of Master Universe book with Dark Horse as well. With my brother, we co-wrote and helped assemble that, and do research for it, and then that did lead to DC Comics got the rights to Master Universe, and that led to me doing Injustice versus Master Universe.
Now you also wrote Masterverse series, which just in 2023 as well, and then you did Forge of Destiny, and once again, these have its own continuity to it, but you also had the He-Man books, Master of the Universe books before that Keith Giffen wrote a few, a major run. So when you're thinking about what exists in your version of the Master of the universe, which books or movies or TV shows are you looking at as saying, this is my version of what the world is going to look like, or that at least I'm going to work from?
I mean, I treat it the same way I treat what I did when I was a kid. Is everything counts. So I mean, I try not to reference stuff, if it's confusing or contradictory, but mostly I just think, it all counts. And the way we treated the Injustice one was that Rob David and he worked with Dan Abnett, and there was Keith Giffen run as well, had worked on a run of Master Universe that was pretty self-contained, and that one was kind of what we would call the sort of DC run, the Eternity run. And then they had also done Thundercats Master Universe, and that was set up with this sort of like universal version of Master Universe because we we want to see, the He-Man meet with the Thundercats and Lion-O, So there were kind of two versions of the story there anyway. And so we decided to use the Thundercats version of Master Universe for Justice. They referenced that they had just met up with some cat dudes in there. Um, and so, but it never was super important to me. It was as long as like, the most important elements of Master Universe were there. And I thought because it's a story with Superman in it, and this Superman was a bad guy, that the idea of power, the problem of power, those Universal Masters Universe themes would have to be played up in there. They would be important. So I just didn't worry about it that much. But when we did Masterverse, obviously because it was a story about multiple continuities coming together, then we did reference um, the sort of the DC Eternity He-Man who became King He-Man in that story, and we referenced the cartoon He-Man, the New Adventures He-Man, and then because those worlds individually were important, that I try to be more specific to their continuities.
So, like I said, Master He-Man has had such some wonderful adaptation. There's obviously the most recent one is the Kevin Smith Revelations cartoon, which was really well done in my opinion. I mean, visually fantastic. The voice actor they had was fantastic, and that kind of was like a sequel to the original cartoon as well, sort of. And
It's also kind of in the universal, you know, everything counts world, right? Like it's kind of I think that's kind of the way you have to play with these things is that they're, they've been through a lot of iterations, and because there was no set sort of, you know, tight standard continuity, that you can open it up to what people remember is probably the most important thing. So the I think Kevin and Tim Sheridan and Rob were thinking about what do people know about He-Man? Like not the hardcore fans, just regular people. And those things are, his dad is the king, and his mom is from Earth, and his friend is Orko, and Tila's the captain of the guard. Like things that they knew, everybody knows. You have to do that stuff, and then everything else I think can be a little bit less firm.
now, the one thing I did notice in the comic book that you did change from the original cartoon for the better is that you solved the secret identity problem a little bit of He-Man because Prince Adam and He-Man look exactly the same in the original cartoon, like exactly the same. And so does the figures are exactly the same stuff where they repainted Prince Adam to make it look a little bit different.
Yeah.
So how important was that to make sure you made it make more sense to older generations to have a distinctly different looking Prince Adam from He-Man?
I mean, not important to me at all. I don't care because I think, Clark Kent is Superman, and if it, I think people have got a problem with it. It's like, look, it's just because it's part of the story, and He-Man and Prince Adam were the same model in the filmation thing because budget, because time. They couldn't make an entirely new figure for the toys either, and so, for me, it's just like just accept that. Like, yes, it's goofy, but who cares? So it doesn't really concern me, but obviously it was part of the 2000 era cartoon that a more an Adam that looked like a teenager and was built like a teenager, and so yeah, we when we got to the Revelation stuff, obviously that was part of the design as well. So I think it works. There's a good reason to do it. I think it makes it probably more relatable to kids. If you've seen the Netflix CGI show, that transformation, him being a kid there is because it's aimed at kids is a big part of it. But at the time it was just filmation. It was like, here's the body types we have. It's female and male. That's it. You got two. So and you got these. They had to save time and money. So um, yeah, I think of it like very much like the Clark Kent glasses thing. Like you accept a certain amount of goofiness in this stuff, and it's just part of the tradition. And if you overthink it, also it doesn't make sense that a guy turns into another dude with it when he lifts a sword, and none of that makes sense. So, so for me, it's just as long as the heart is there, I'm fine with it.
Now, that in your opinion, and this might be an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. In your opinion, is He-Man literally the same exact person as Prince Adam, but strong? Or is he slightly different as He-Man?
I mean, I thought it was a different guy. That I mean, again, this is well, I don't know because it's open to anybody. But my interpretation of it always has been that he essentially puts on a suit when he turns into He-Man, like that. It's a magical suit. Obviously, there's no like, you know, he's sort of stuck in it, but he turns into someone. It kind of becomes this thing that's imbued with magical power, the knowledge of Grayskull, the power of Grayskull. So that's kind of how I always thought about it, and I think this sort of conversation always happens with Captain Marvel too, with Shazam. Where is he turned to an adult version of himself, or is this a different? There's all kinds of kind of questions into that stuff. I guess yeah, that's how I tend to think about it. But I'm open to other interpretations as well. I mean, I think because part of it isn't to me is that there's now this legacy to it, and that there was King Grayskull, and obviously he looks like He-Man in some versions. In the Revelations one, he's got different skin color, but I always kind of thought it was like he was sort of taking on aspects of the King.
Well, I mean,
but I could go any direction with it.
Well, like I said, I mean, I do love. Like I said, I was, I still have the He-Man toys, in my house. They're set up, and the Curo cabinet. They're very cool. And I always found that something they were doing like fascinating. Like once again, like Hordak. Is Hordak the actual Hordak, or is there like a Prime Hordak? And there's kind of like this whole, aspect of the intergalactic Hordak, and then they had the Shira cartoon that kind of pushed that idea a little bit. There's so many different aspects of these characters, and it's interesting to see which ones the writers explore. And Forge of Destiny feels a little bit like an Argent story, a little bit for the He-Man universe. Was that kind of how you approach it, or was it strictly Cyclone's Argent that you thought as the focus?
I mean, the way we wanted to do it was that the majority of the Master Universe stories that have been told in the last, 10 years or so, and even if you're looking in some ways at the Eternity series, the Rob series, Rob David did, there are a lot of like big event stories, right? And there aren't a lot of like, the episodes of the cartoon or like the old mini comic. Sometimes there was just Master Universe stories where they met a new character and they, and it wasn't always like, and then it had to end with Castle Grayskull and a big cosmic fight and every toy, like, which I've done a couple times. Masterverse and Injustice were both that kind of thing, as was Rob and Lloyd's story for Thundercats Master Universe, because you want that, right? You want the big thing, but I guess our thinking was, Revelation was another big cosmic crossover story that'd be nice just to do like, here's a Master Universe story and live in the world a little bit, like not have it be a big cosmic thing, but have it be a story about, about what Eternia is like, what is the politics of this place? What is, there's the idea that things that we hadn't seen as much in the cartoon, um, you know, stuff I really wanted to explore, I guess, with how medieval kingdoms work and how they had bannermen and how just like stuff that I thought would be interesting to see in Master Universe, but it gives us a chance just to do a story where, He-Man has to go do something and Adam has to do something, but there's a cause and effect to it. And part of that was, when He-Man is introduced, it changes the dynamics of Eternia. All of a sudden there's this guy who appears to be infinitely powerful and he's helping people, but it seems as though he's works for Randor. So that was kind of a thing I want to make sure that we played with. That's interesting, like what was it like when He-Man first showed up? But it was also something we haven't really seen, which was, what are the first couple moments of, or first couple stories when Adam turns into He-Man? Like, what's that like? How does he
Right.
feel? I thought that would be an interesting thing to cover.
Well, I think also it kind of, in my mind, where I was reading it, posed an interesting question, which is He-Man the hero of Eternia or Eternos?
Yeah.
And
Right.
the question I thought of myself, if he is the hero of Eternia, what happens when his goals and Eternos' goals are not the same? So what is he truly the hero for?
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, that would be something I would love to do more with. That, because having a character tied to a king and he is the prince. Yeah, I mean, what if he disagrees with something that Randor does? Is he? That's great. I would love to see that. I mean, and that's the kind of stuff that obviously wasn't a big purview of a kid's cartoon, and probably shouldn't be. But the majority of human history, we've had kings and royalty and stuff as our rulers. Democracy is only occasional in human history, and it's usually not good,
Right.
obviously. So, but the idea of Randor was always that he was this benevolent king, and that's great, and I want to make sure that that's part of the story. But also, it's like, well, what is it like to live in a world that has you know aristocracy and it has these levels of power and local power as well? Because the idea has to be that Randor seems to be the king of the entire continent. And so, I thought it'd be just interesting to see. And then obviously, then Skeletor arrives, and it changes those power dynamic. And so, a big part of what I wanted to do with Forge of Destiny was all of a sudden there's all these types of people who live in Eternia, and then the question is, whose side are you on? This guy is out here. He comes from somewhere else. He seems to be some kind of demon warrior wizard dude. He's gathering these, Beastman, who's a king of the beast, or the tribal leader of the Beastman, and Merman, who's a king of the Aqua people, and that would freak people out because you're upsetting the dynamic. So that's what I really want to explore. Is okay. So now we've got, you have already pledged. You're the bannerman here. Are you going to stand with us? And then adding Anwar Gar to it, being this place that's essentially a sort of hermit kingdom. And I kind of wanted to do something sort of like North Korea or something, where there's this place and no one's really sure what they've been up to there. They've pulled back from the world, um, and then just have the technology and the appearance of Anwar Gar be vastly different from Eternia. Like
Hmm.
my pitch for it was, Eternia is sort of this like it's like medieval with laser gun, and then you go to Anwar, and it's like Blade Runner. It's like
Yeah.
this neon lit cyberpunk city with these people who have got this technology, but it's like also kind of like Cuba. They're stuck there and they haven't been able to trade with other people, and so they've got to keep their cars running and stuff. So that's kind of what I was thinking of it.
So I think another interesting philosophical question I think your combo kind of opens up about the world of He-Man is with Tila, who is put in charge of protecting Prince Adam, making sure that he is a noble prince instead of being a coward and all that. And she takes what she feels as the moral failings of Prince Adam very personally. Now, He-Man knows, and Prince Adam knows that that's not the true about Prince Adam because he's He-Man, but obviously Tila doesn't know that. And by keeping that secret from her, they're kind of doing some sort of a certain level of damage to her emotionally.
Yeah.
So, as He-Man being someone who's always supposed to do the right thing, how does he kind of square that hole right there of technically he's keeping that secret from her, and that's not really for the best, it seems like, for her at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, to me, so comic book superheroes, there's some established stuff that has worked really well for a long time. And I was an intern at Marvel back in 1999, and there was a document that Jim Shooter, the editor at Marvel, had passed out in the 80s at some point. And it said that superheroes have to have a can't must, which was that I can't do this, but I must, right? Which is this conflict. And if you can sort of put that around the character's superhero identity, that makes that a compelling character. And that's why Spider-Man has lasted this long, and that's why Batman, and that's why Superman, and all these characters. And so I thought the can't must for there must be consequences for Adam doing this. And the one that has always been the most interesting to me, and it's set up by the original cartoon, but obviously um, they don't play into the darker side of it as much. But is that Tila has to take care of Adam. The worse he is, the more he abandons his station to go be He-Man to do these things, the worse it is for her. She has to. So in the story, we reveal that she was offered a position; she could have her own regiment and a garrison, which is what she wants, but she couldn't because the king called her back and said, "Can you please keep an eye on Adam because he's been screwing up?" And so that is a consequence of Adam running off to be He-Man and having this secret identity. But he's also, trying to protect his family. If everybody knows he's He-Man, then the Superman thing that they will be in danger. So it's a can't must, which I think makes a superhero more compelling. And that's the thing is he has to weigh that. And I wanted to play that in this story as well, because he tells Cyclone who he is, because he's weighing in his head, well, it's better for Cyclone to know who I am than for him to keep doing this and trying to kill me, because we have to go stop Skeletor. But with Teela, he's weighed it and said, no, it's better that she doesn't. And that's good drama. That's the makings of superhero drama is the can't must. I can't tell Aunt May because it'll give her a heart attack, right? But I have to keep sneaking around, and so I worry her. Like, that's great stuff. That's drama. That's what makes a superhero story compelling.
So, I mean, like, as you mentioned, is it very intentional who he chooses to tell? As it, let's say, Orko knows, Man of Arms knows, obviously the Sorceress, because she's going to give him the powers. So, what is the metric that he's using for who can handle the truth and who can't?
I mean, because part of it, and this is stuff that Tim and Kevin had set up and Rabbit set up in the Revelation show was, and obviously it's always been part of it that Man Arms and Orko know, and the Sorceress. It's in the intro to the show, but part of the my thought was Man Arms found out accidentally, and maybe Orko too. I'm not exactly sure. We don't exactly see the story, but but to some degree, that's the thing that Adam is okay with, because Man Arms can protect himself. He's an old soldier, and Adam needs his help. But it's a burden for Man Arms to know this. So his can't must is, I know this and I must support it, even though it hurts his relationship with King Randor. So his can't must is, I have to lie to my king, who I've sworn my loyalty to, as we know, because they were both soldiers back in the days before. And so that's the weight that puts, on, they each have conflict. And that's something I want to play out, because they sort of set it up in Revelation that, when it's revealed, Randor gets really mad at at Duncan. In fact, he fires him. And so, that stuff I wanted to make sure we set up now so that it plays off in the episodes later.
So with Dash, how does it impact him to realize he's worthy of that truth of who He-Man is? Does that change Dash's trajectory as a hero?
I thought so. The way I want to play it with this one is, if you've read issue 4, so Dash now is sort of he's a weapon, right? He's the same as He-Man. He's a weapon of mass destruction, essentially. And so the balance now is that Anwar Gar has something that can balance He-Man, which is Cyclone, who's really, I mean, he can turn into a tornado. That's dangerous shit. And so the idea there, once Dash becomes Cyclone, he knows that Adam is He-Man, and so he gives that up. He erases the information from his own head, because it's no longer fair, right? It's no longer even. If he knows that about He-Man, so he gives it up. That's his thing at the end. That's his can't must. If I know if I know this, I'm dangerous to Adam, and that makes us, no longer balanced. I'm no longer the equivalent of He-Man and Anwar Gar to Eterna. So he deletes it. He makes a sacrifice and says, I don't need to know this information. I no longer know who you are. So that's kind of how I see. I set it all up so it all ties back together. It was a lot of thinking. You wouldn't think so, but it was.
Like I said, I really did love what you did with the series. And that is the first origin of Cyclone, correct? I don't remember ever having an actual backstory for the character.
No, he has one in one of the mini comics where he's essentially created by the same. It was actually in one of the Golden books, I believe. He was created by the same technology that built Spydor. It was turned into a robot. He was also a acrobat in that. I actually took it from there, and they had another origin in one of the British comics, I think. But yeah, I try to pull little bits of it. His name was Dash in the Golden Book story as well. But he wasn't from Anwar Gar. He was just a circus performer. So I added some stuff together to make something new.
Now, Dash refers to being an artist as being beneficial to harnessing the Phlogiston. Am I saying it correctly?
Yeah.
The Phlogiston. Yeah. So how does that how does being an artist become beneficial for harnessing that power?
Well, my thinking of it was that it's essentially something you can control with willpower and creativity. And so, if you have to do art for a living, it takes a lot of willpower. And I figured, because it was something that was, as we explained, was it was basically a tool. It was like a, and so if you could imagine how to use it, you could turn it into something more usefully. And so Dash, being an acrobat and a performer, he came up with the Cyclone identity.
Now, Cyclone is magic, as they mentioned, both magic and technology, which is kind of what HeMan's all about. The future technology plus this magic aspect to it, and some medieval aspect thrown in as well. So, because he does represent the larger Eternia, what does that mean for him and what his goals are, as far as being a reflection of that world?
I mean, I was thinking of him as being, because there's all these characters that He-Man works with. There are other heroes, but really, you don't really need anybody else if you have He-Man, hypothetically, right? But we get cool guys like Manny Faces and Roboto, and they're all allies, and that's cool. And so my thinking sort of is that I wanted to give some of these characters origins that made them slightly different aspects. So they didn't all, like, they're not like a Justice League. Like, they don't all get together every time Darkseid shows up or something, or Lex Luthor. They are sort of have different functions and jobs, and so Cyclone is essentially like the deterrent. He's a nuclear deterrent to stuff messing with Anwar Gar. And so part of my thought was, like, in the future you could do a story where it's like they have a threat big enough they have to call in Cyclone, right? Like, that's if Skeletor does something that that menaces the whole world, then you could have we have to call in the team, and then you get Cyclone. So but he would sort of be like a local hero. I think he would do stuff, and he's sort of the prince of he's the Prince Adam of his city as well.
And I think another cool thing is how, I don't think this is too much of a, I mean, it's a spoiler, but the series has been out, the issue's out, so I think it's okay to discuss it. At the end of the issue, fourth issue, Teela refers to having to protect He-Man from Prince Adam. So what does she mean by that?
Because she essentially, he's so irresponsible, and so, and people always, he has, as far as she can tell, and that to her from the outside, it sort of looks like Adam gets in a bunch of trouble and He-Man has to come in and save the day, even though it's the other way around. So that's how she sort of is reacting to this, and they just went through this thing where it appears to her that Adam disappeared for an entire time, and then He-Man had to do all this shit and go find Adam at the end, and he was shacked up with some maiden in a barn somewhere, or in a fishing dock or whatever, as it was in an Island Gar. So that's kind of how she reacts to it, and so she's at this point in him is like, we wouldn't need He-Man to do all this stuff if you would get your shit together, which obviously is the other.
Right. So when you're thinking about Master of the Universe going forward, do we have another series already in the books that's being made right now? Can you give us a little hints about where we're going in the future Master of the Universe?
I can't tell you what it is, but there is another one I'm working on, and I think it will be announced maybe in the next couple months, I think. But I just turned in the first issue on last Friday, so yes, there is another one. I'm writing it, and there's also another series, I believe, that is a prequel to Revolution. So that I'm not writing. You get more He-Man stuff coming out soon.
Can you tell us if the new thing coming out, is that going to be a miniseries, like a 4-issue, like Forge of Destiny was?
Yes.
Okay.
It will be
in the same continuity, as it were, maybe following this story, or is it going in a different direction completely?
I can't tell you.
Okay. Is there anything you can hint about where this one's headed?
You'll be excited. It'll be, yeah.
So
enjoy.
When you're ready to do that, you can come back on and talk about it.
Sure.
All right, fantastic. Mr. Seeley, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk He-Man with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a fantastic night, sir.
All right, you too, man.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Traversing Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for the next exciting episode.